Good fortune makes the man, and the man, he retains the fortune, and he multiplies it many times. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another transmission from paradise. Yes, broadcasting from the heavenly shores of St. Bart's, it's the Acid Capitalist Show, beamed straight into your ears, sun-kissed and untamed. This week, I open the vault. I'm pulling an old gem from my private paywall, unchaining it from the Patreon and the Substack for the first time. And trust me, this one's a cracker. The year is 2000. The stage, honey, is Wall Street. And our protagonist, Derek Wallis. To some, he's known as the Kiwi Proton Bomb. He's fresh off the boat, he's wide-eyed, an eager foot soldier on the trading floor. But what happens when the greenhorn is tasked with telling none other than Stan Druckenmiller, the man, the legend, that he's just vaporized $1 billion a yard? Trial by fire? No, my friends, this was trial by inferno. And then there's George Soros, the erratic, the enigmatic, the palindromic genius, the man who stalks markets like a predator, sees bubbles before they've even taken shape, and who vanishes for months, who does that sound like, only to reappear calling the desk 4 times every hour. Soros, the hurricane around which entire fortunes rise and fall. And Derek was there, watching, learning, surviving. He's even written a book about it. Now fast forward, 2005, and the acid capitalist, who else, walks into Soros Fund Management. Ladies and gentlemen, the room temperature drops, chairs scrape, portfolios tremble. Again, Derek was there. You know what? They all were. And the chairman, in a moment of delirious clarity, the chairman of Soros, he comes into the boardroom and he utters the immemorial words, George, we found the next George Soros. Just who was he talking about? That's where things get damn interesting. But it gets wilder still. Trading desks, chaos, the kind of madness that makes a market. You want the full story? You want to know about the topless woman who brought down the Bloomberg terminals? You want to hear the truth about how the world's greatest speculator saw bubbles, rode them, burst them? Then you'll want to listen to this one. So stay sharp, my psychonauts. And P.S., if you're asking, what's the score? If you're asking that damn question every hour of the trading day, you're already lost. Because the markets whisper in static. But ask once a year, and if you're good, now if you're exceptionally good, mirror, mirror on the wall, it might just reveal that you're a trading genius. Best of luck, my friends. I hope you enjoy.
I don't identify myself as being a trader, and actually I think the thing that I missed in my professional career was a real money-making trader.
You know, George is known as a trader. The famous stat with George is that George outperformed Warren Buffett almost every year, and yet Warren Buffett's worth a lot more money than George. And I ended up getting a job working for George Soros, not even knowing who George Soros was.
So you had no financial background?
I had a master's degree. I did, from Auckland University, which no one cares about, of course. I worked in London, and I was just passing through. When I came to New York, I knew one person who, you would have to invent if he didn't exist. His name was Rocky Ramundi, and he was a fireman, an evangelical, Christian fireman from Tom's River who lived in New York. And so I would come in with him and stay in his firehouse and spend 48 hours interviewing, and then I would go back to Tom's River with him and hang out with his Christian family. And just struck by lightning one day, and ended up staying there. My nickname was the Kiwi Neutron Bomb, because I had two jobs. One was I don't know if you remember those pink and white paper tickets. Pink was sell and white was buy, right? And that's the analog day of doing business. But I had another job, which was to read out the profit and loss. And so it's February 2000. The technology's pretty weak. It's just a Reuters feed, really, with an Excel spreadsheet. And George or Druck would call up and ask where the P&L is, and I would say we're up $88,954,322, because I took my job really seriously, right? And the traders would say, just round up, stupid. Druck, we're up $100 million. And so when the Nasdaq crashed, I think we lost something like $920 million in a single day. And he called up to check the P&L, and I go, we're down $1 billion. And when George heard that, he shut the doors. Yeah.
We've lost the yard. Back then, I just traded manically, and I traded almost 24 hours. And it was a jotter or blotter. And my trader had been the compliance officer, and I kind of liked him. And I thought it was funny to make him my trader. And he was just like taking my
sounds very efficient. It's efficient.
Yeah. But he literally would have, he'd have to write in ink. He'd have to write the trade and the price and the execution, and I swear there were days when I went through about 3 big books just trading.
When I arrived at Soros, there were probably 20 some traders, and they all had those white blotters and paper tickets. And the head trader back then, who went on to work for Duquesne, he used to have this duffel bag, and he would take all the sheets of paper off people's desks and put them into the duffel bag and bring them home. And when they were investigated by the SEC, he turned up at their offices with all these duffel bags, like 100 of them, and just dropped them all on the SEC offices, right? And of course, they couldn't make head or tail of it, and they just dismissed the investigation.
I do recall those slips. Now they came in after the jotter. That was an advance. But I always had a spreadsheet, a live spreadsheet with the score. We had a custodian bank which was there to make sure we weren't liars, and so every day it was confirmed. The reconciliation of our score with theirs, and it was pretty much always tight. And I can. So I find that odd. I mean, maybe it's a good thing. It is a good thing that Stan has to call. Like, wait, what's the score? I knew the score all the time. That was the curse.
I remember, we were long a lot of gold back then, short the banks and long gold. And George called up one time and he said, well, look, I want to buy another $500 million worth of gold. And the macro trader said, well, you can't buy anymore because of the position limits. And George said, well, those don't apply to me. And he said, no, these are the CFTC position limits. Like, you're at the limit of how much gold you're allowed to buy. And he said, well, where is this gold that we buy? And he said, well, it's contracts with the bank. And he said, well, I don't want to have them on with the banks because all the banks are going to go out of business. Yeah. Right? They're not going to be able to honor the contracts. I mean, we had gold underneath the Swiss airport. We had gold in, bullion form. We had ETFs. We had, you name it, everything. But he was most worried about the contracts with the banks. So,
well,
and we had 10 prime brokers. So, shifting money between them wasn't really a problem.
So I knew the European financial aristocracy, the ones that all come in with the Lugano guys, and ridden on George's coattails, and found other ex-traders and the like, and they were really top of their business, and they all had that position, and they came to me and they gave me a big slug of capital at a very, very attractive rate. Half my performance fee, because they could see the trouble brewing, of 2008, and they all had that hedge. They had gold as the hedge, and as you know, they were right, but the hedge didn't work. Gold dropped like 45% in that kind of between the third and the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it wasn't a straight line, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah. It wasn't a hedge. It didn't hedge. It came into its own again when they did QE and people went into it's hyperinflation and gold caught a bit.
There's a funny story from that time. I remember George was at Davos, and we had started buying gold ETFs. This is more in the QE era than the financial crisis, and so she found out we were buying gold because we had to file with a 13F. And then he called up the desk later on and said, I said, "Where's gold?" And we're like, "Well, gold, you were just on, George, you were on television saying gold's in a bubble. Gold's down 8%, and we've lost like $800 million. And he said, "Well, I said it was in a bubble." He goes, "But I didn't say it was going to burst. Go buy 500 million gold, just keep buying and buying and buying."
Oh, yeah. I mean,
wild.
But bubbles are the greatest money-making opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
As long as
if there's one, rule that I've taken with me is don't sell new highs, right? There's time to get out. You can have your stop losses or whatever else, but taking profits on trades that that are going your way is a mistake.
I mean, at some point you got to take profits. Yeah. I always had the biggest challenge is to overcome inertia. You have a constant REM, and George used to have the backache.
That's right.
Some manifestation, but something that that you get a bit of grind in the mental process, and it typically concerns a risk position. And my point was, I'd take a third off, and if I'm wrong, I've only taken a third off. If I'm right, I'm actually in motion. So a bit of a kind of Jesse Livermore. He would recommend. I love this wisdom that if he was looking to short something, he would buy it first. If he was looking to buy something, he would short it. Just there's something about ownership and just owning those different aspects of risk that gives you a more comprehensive view of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, you should always steel man the opposing argument, shouldn't you? To understand your own argument better.
Yeah, but to the high thing, never. People watching this, you never short the all-time high. It's just if you've shorted the all-time high, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. This is a business, like George says, it's a bubble, but let's buy.
It's who said it's going to burst?
I'm hearing the audience saying, "Oog, come on, wake up, we want to know Derek's story." So, forgive me, I was talking about me.
That's right.
But no, so you're there by happenstance, good fortune. Fortune makes the man. The man retains the fortune and multiplies it. Yeah, and you're collecting the sheets for the trading. George is just Stan's blown the fund up, dropped a yard in a day, and there's no one left except you. You're like, oh, there's no more sheets. What do I do? What happens? And what happened?
So there were three of us left. A guy named we used to call the trading desk the Star Wars bar because it was 20 of the strangest people you ever come across, right? Very few of them Ivy League grads, blue collar guys made good. So it was myself, a guy we used to call Knuckles, and a guy we used to call Skid because his last name was Marks, so Skid Marks. And George actually came down and offered me a job. And the story behind that, the legend behind that is that we were sort of sitting around doing nothing, and we used to look out the window, and there was this woman that was a top of a hotel, and she was sunbathing topless. And so every day we would stare at this woman, and Howard Stern was staring at her, talking about her on the radio as well. It just happened to be. And one day I decided to go down and talk to her. So I went down, made my way through the hotel, went over, talked to her, and pointed out, the trading desk at Soros. And I said, "Can you sign your name here? I'll bring it back to the boys." And all of a sudden she kind of covered up, even though all of Midtown had been staring at this woman for about 3 weeks. And so I left and I went back up to the trading desk, and then the human resources rang, and I thought they were going to fire me. And George came down and offered me a job. But yeah, I think George probably stayed out of the markets for about 3 or 4 months, and then he couldn't help himself. He had to get back in. So the three of us, I used to trade equities. Knuckles traded macro, and Skid traded the European markets, and then we started hiring portfolio managers and built up the operation again from the ground up.
So George is giving you instructions.
Strange days.
George is telling you to buy or sell something, yeah, in an equity.
Yes, and with no regard to liquidity. George might say, "Well, I want to buy $100 million of something," and we would say, "Look, it's a $50 million market cap," and he would be like, "Oh, okay, just buy $2 million." But most of the trading was done through a pod system. So he would hire a CIO. The CIO would hire portfolio managers. Portfolio managers would be given a base of capital.
But in the year 2000, is George essentially either calling you or sending you a message?
Yeah, his son Robert also was very involved in the firm, and so Robert had had the family money.
You're trying to buy with the least disruption to the price.
Yes. So you're trying to buy something. So for if a stock's $100, and you buy 1 million shares, and you end up buying with an average cost of $101, you've cost your shareholders $1 million, right? If you buy it at $99, you've made the shareholders $1 million. So you're trying to buy that as tight as possible to last sale, and so avoiding, there's probably you could put costs into sort of 4 buckets. There's commission costs, which are relatively small. Implementation shortfall, which is if George comes in to buy something, the stock's going to move, right? And so my job is to minimize that implementation shortfall costs.
So how do you disguise you have to disguise yourself now?
Yes, there would be, in the days of the telephone, it was very difficult to do that. So you would, the Soros light would ring at Deutsche Bank or at some bank, and that was on backup turrets, at other traders. And so, I wouldn't say that the trading floor went silent, when the Soros light rang, but, everybody, I could hear these guys talking. The George was known as the Palindrome because his name is spelt the same front or back, right? Soros. And so, if the Bank of India was buying something, you'd hear chicken tikkas buying yen. So I don't think there were any secrets back then. We had some electronic systems. Internet, would allow you to buy things anonymously, or sell things anonymously. Eventually, operation things like LiquidNet, crossing networks would allow you to do so. But Soros was a big name in 2000, and then he kind of disappeared for our name disappeared for no one cared about us for 4 or 5 years. Not really until the financial crisis. Mutual funds became the big thing, right? So
you guys were cranking it out. George was cranking it out.
Yeah, and I forget exactly what his track record is, but it's obviously incredible.
Were you doing lots and lots of trades, or it was just George?
It's so long ago, it's hard for me to remember. But by about 2002, we had hired a CIO named Bob Bishop. Bob Bishop was a Maverick guy, and I think he was like 150% of Maverick to net 1 year or something, and he came over and he ran the firm, CIO, and ran the firm. And he traded like a maniac. He's in Florida now. Impala is the name of his fund. Great guy. But, George was the boss. Bishop was of the opinion that we were moving into, a massive bull market in late 2002 and early 2003. He had a careful study of military conflicts. He thought that we were going to wipe the floor with Iraq, and he was right. And then that was the beginning of a massive bull market, but George disagreed and blew him out in like March of 2000 of 2003 rather, and
Really?
so
Oh,
yeah, it was a shame. And we were, I remember we were long, every industrial and cyclical stock you can imagine, and Bishop was a important guy and had a wasn't going to be bossed around by anybody. And when they didn't see the world the same, ultimately it was George's name on the door,
yeah.
and Bishop was forced out.
Yeah.
And they probably left $1 billion on the table back when $1 billion was a lot of money. Yeah, it was wild. Sometimes we wouldn't hear from George for 6 months. Other times he'd call in 4 or 5 times a day.
I literally have a chapter about walking into Soros's office in, I think, 2005. And the largest of the meeting rooms, everyone was there. Robert was there.
I was probably there.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, and I remember I walked in wearing blue tight. They weren't jeans, but they were kind of cotton or something. Cowboy boots, a red jumper.
No, I would have remembered that. Yeah, I don't think I would.
Sunglasses, and I had swagger.
Yeah, sure. Hey, you've still got swagger. That's good.
But the thing that haunts me, because I really knew the senior people, and there was a time when the former chairman of the Quantum Fund came in, and he was very. I don't want to mention names, but I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. And he was very tall and had a bit of a stoop, and he came in with a rolled up piece of paper, and he was saying, "Josh," and he throws it down on the boardroom table. The board's all there, board. And he's like, "I have found the next George Soros." And he was talking about me. And so, whilst, that's kind of fun, imagine it's kind of sad that I didn't live up to those expectations.
You have as good a reputation around, the financial community as you could have possibly hoped for, though, no?
Oh, love George. And when, do you recall when he really agitated and began his campaign around the events of 2007?
About a year beforehand, he had started to warn, and to George's credit, I think George and I don't share politics, but he's clearly an intellectually honest guy. We may have had our position on, right, but he would have been warning for the right reasons that people should prepare for the worst, and we were short Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all the banks, the entire financial system, and
which was an impossibly hard trade because they consistently went up until they just blew up.
Yeah. He part of it is when it's your own money, and you can be as leveraged as you want, can't you?
Tell me about George kind of recognizing an error, being wrong, saying, yeah, let's close it. Did that happen?
Yeah, I think that when he was wrong, he would just take the trade off. That was it. He famously would.
What was a wrong trade for George? Because it can go against him. He's like, I'm George. I'm always right. So, what would encourage him to say, not this time?
Well, famously, it was his backache, right? He would lose money, and his shoulder would hurt, and then he would take the trade off.
If he'd sat there for 3 months and not had a positive P&L or something like that, or
that didn't seem to bother him. He would call up. Sometimes he wouldn't call the desk for a month, and he was off doing, opening a university up in Eastern Europe or something like that. He always had another CIO that was in charge of this. Even when I first arrived in 2000, Stan Druckenmiller was the CIO. It was in his hands. He famously bought in the 8th innings when he thought it was the 5th innings. And then when the crash happened, George just stepped in and closed everything down. So,
but I mean, Stan's a friggin' legend. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, he dropped what 920 million a day. I mean, like, what was that? Like an 18% drawdown on the day or something like that. Shit happens. The guy, like, his compound growth rate is Soros.
I think the problem with that trade was that they knew that they were playing greater full, right? Because what had happened is they'd actually tried to short the Nasdaq back in about 98 or 99. So they didn't really believe the trade, and it was a good thing they didn't, because of course they sold everything in March 2000, and things went down for another year and a half, right? And we were long pets.com and all this garbage, right? And we sold it all. In fact, we crashed the markets.
Yeah, but most of that after that was the high tech kind of thing, or the days following the high tech, when Stan got closed out. But again, the real shot was probably September of that year. You don't hit the first one, but
we were short. We were short everything by then.
But yeah, and you should be. Yeah, you should be. Obviously. But again, it's the participation in the Nasdaq is like George being on TV and saying gold's in a bubble, and it's like, yeah, buy me more. You've got to participate in bubbles, and that's what Stan was doing. I think Stan is just the greatest investor for me. When he comes on TV, oh my God, TV comes on the computer. We don't have TVs anymore.
That's right. Yeah, you can watch him speak, for an hour and a half, not get bored. The only thing that bothers me is Stan. He looks a little like Jeff Bridges, right? So he's got that big head. Yeah. No,
there's a lot going on in that big head.
When I first got there, they would say, don't send emails out, right? Don't call portfolio managers, they'll call you. Now that changed, and I changed it as well. I started the desk sending out morning emails, recapping research, talking about the markets, explaining how we thought the world worked. And as portfolio managers would come on, they'd be sort of part of our ecosystem to some extent. And then ultimately, we got complacent, and the entire desk, filtered, lost their jobs one at a time. Right?
You would have hated me because I just didn't want to know. You couldn't contact even the investment banks. Yeah, I had nobody on the other side. Hey, Hugh, how's it going today? What's up? I'm like, who is this? Like, go away. I had no one. The guy would call, hey, I want to be your first call. I'm from Deutsche or whatever.
But your trader would take those calls, right? Or they would call you directly.
They would call, but they all want. Come on, the
sure.
deal. It's the senior guy on the desk, and he's got to show to the management that he's on a one-to-one with the
that's right.
And I didn't go to the schools. I didn't go shooting. I didn't take any entertainment. I was obsessed by the world of macro, and I was consumed by it. And I kind of want to say I look not bad now, because I spent 35 years chaste. I was just like, I was so puritanical and monk-like. I did nothing. I just thought I was going to say traded, but I thought.
Yeah, it's probably for the best. Probably didn't get you. You could have got yourself in trouble. I was personally saved by meeting my wife in 2004, and so I couldn't get up to too much trouble. And when the first 3 years at Soros, all I wanted to do was work, right? Get in there at 5:30, leave at 5, and then I was sociable. I would go out afterwards, but but that was part of a trader's job, to be the point of contact for all the banks, and all the we were running a commission budget of $100 million just in US equities, right? That was better than being president.
I've got a good friend who spends half the year here in St. Bart's, and he was a PM and trader, and the stories he tells me, like because that world all changed.
Sure, yeah.
after après scheme situation got more tedious.
Well, introduce him to me. I could always do some more stories in the book, right?
Yeah, no, he's definitely got stories. The what did you write today?
What did I write today?
Yeah.
I wrote about so I write two emails. I write a first email that's quite dry. It comes out at 6:00 in the morning, and it really just breaks down what matters macro, and then through sectors, industrial sectors, technology sectors, and some trivia, and kind of a fun email. The second email's more editorial, and so this morning. I had a quick note about the VP debate, but I actually talked about people as nodes in a network, and this jumped out at me because there's an article that's circulating around on Substack that when Microsoft looked at messages and found that 240 million people, there's about 8 degrees of separation between all of them. And 10 years later, Facebook says that there's only 3 degrees. And so networks have become denser, right? And the punchline is that you might know 1,000 people and they know 1,000, which means you're 2 people away from 1 million people, right? And 3 people away from 1 billion people. And so the humans as nodes in a network, that's what I wrote about this morning.
Let's have a brief conversation. In terms of, so you've got your own personal risk portfolio. Well done. And it's you let it run, so to speak. It's somewhat passive. Can you say something? Because I have this engagement with my listeners in terms of how much of your net wealth that you commit to. And net wealth for most people is the value of their property minus their mortgage. Yeah. And then they'll have an equity portfolio, have some Bitcoin, whatever, a bit of gold. So, and that, what I'm saying is take that net and think of you. I mean, you don't have to reveal your own thing, but have you ever put it through that prism? Because I've done it, and I'm like the max. If I was like super, super concentrated managing the thing, and I had a Bloomberg and all that, the max would be 10% of my net wealth. This is a preposterously risky endeavor, and like you and I have got 30 years or so of knowledge in this thing, and we're like, this is really hard. And you've got like kids and other people who've got daytime jobs, and you've got to accumulate 10 years of getting things wrong before something clicks. So I'm like saying to people, 10 should be your max. And they're like, no, but I've got to make money. I'm like, well, you go more than 10 and you can't hold it and you'll lose it. But again, too many words for me. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to think about it is liquid net worth, right? So take the real estate out of this, or take and for younger listeners, I think the most important thing you can possibly do is to max out your 401k. If I was 25 and entering the workforce, I would do what I ended up doing, which was to max out my 401k and put it in the S&P, right? As to trading, the swashbuckling thing, and this, you think you're going to make $1 million on this, I would say less than 10% would be prudent.
Yeah. So I mean, it makes me think of people get sold finance. You never buy finance, and so there's that thing that's going around on Instagram just now. You're 25, you've got 22 grand, and on the basis of the last 40 years and average returns from the S&P, your 22 grand when you retire at 65 is worth $1 million. Yeah.
Okay.
However, is an average.
That's right.
It's a damn average.
Timing is everything in life. You don't want to go in retirement in 2008, right? You're down 30% in 2009, right?
So if you're not lucky, and you turn 25 in 1969, what do you think your terminal value is 40 years later? So 22 grand, you're 25 years old, you invest in the S&P in 1969. What's your terminal value?
So 40 years later?
Yeah. I mean, it's 200 grand. It's like, that's averages for you, And why? Because you don't compound at 10. In fact, if you're 25 and you're watching this today and you put your 22 grand into the S&P on the basis of that 10% compound annual growth rate, I think you're going to be hugely disappointed.
Yeah, you may be disappointed. I mean, I've been fortunate to have the majority of my liquid net worth in the S&P during an amazing time for wealth creation in this country, right?
So let's end again on the book. The name of the book? Sorry, I don't think we even mentioned.
The name of the book. My brother came up with this. I think it's a particularly clever name, which is it's Occupy a Job on Wall Street, right? So instead of Occupy Wall Street, and it's on Amazon. It's on a audiobook, Kindle. So let's plan to catch up in New York.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
And there you have it. Another chapter in the twisted, the delirious, the absurd theatre of finance, where fortunes are made, lost, and sometimes found again, usually in someone else's pocket. How does that happen? I don't know. I do hope you've enjoyed this descent into market mayhem. Hit the subscribe button, people. Please leave a review or just whisper my name into the night sky. I'll hear it eventually, probably as stars collide. And remember, in the markets, in life, and in St. Bart's, there's only one rule. People, please stay curious. Stay just a little bit reckless. And for God's sake, stay entertained. I will see you, or I'll hear you, or I'll speak to you next time, you bunch of degenerates.